So hi everyone. In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to configure VDO.Ninja to be in a group room mode, but one specifically so that as a director, the guests in the room will only see the output of my OBS video. So they won't be able to see each other directly. They'll just see the output of OBS, which might include the guests. But the video sources will only come from the director. The guests will still be able to talk to each other directly through VDO.Ninja, just not share video between themselves directly. This has the added bonus of reducing CPU load on the guests, since they only need to share video with the director, not themselves. It also means as a director, I can kind of control the show for the guests, providing overlays and other effects that they can then see in real time. Now to configure this, we will go to VDO.Ninja. We can open this up in Chrome or whatever browser we want. Any sort of Chromium browser is recommended. It will technically work with Firefox as well. It's just not going to have as many features. We will click on Create a Room. We can randomly generate a name here. And we generally want a name for a room that's not easily guessable. If it's like test 1, 2, 3, you might find random people joining the room just by guessing the name. We can also prevent that by putting a room password on, and that will make it so no one will be able to guess it as well. Okay, so the only other thing we need to concern ourselves with, though, is we want to configure the room to be in a broadcast mode so the guests can only see the output from our OBS. And so for that, we will click on the guests can see the director, but not each other. And they'll still be able to hear each other though. And then we will enter the control room as a director. So now we've entered the room as a director. The guests will not see this. They'll see a different mode. We see guest 1, 2, 3, 4. We can have more guests than that. That's just for show. And we have our invite link on the left to send the guest, and on the right, links for our OBS input. We'll notice that the invite link has room equals room name, but it also has broadcast as a URL parameter. And VDO.Ninja is very heavy on URL parameters. That is how we configure many of the settings. Broadcast tells the guest when they join to only display video from the director, not the other guests in the room. And we can configure settings here, invite links here, or we can go to docs.video.ninja and configure quite a few additional parameters by referring to the documentation, just by manually editing these URLs. We can customize it with hundreds of different settings. But to keep things simple, we'll just take a basic link, and I'll just invite myself in a new tab. Here we are, and as a guest, I'll join the room. Now, as a guest who's joined the room, I don't see anyone else. I just see my own preview. As a director, though, I will see pretty much everyone who joins, and each person who joins will have their own little control box. Now, if you want to configure settings after a guest joins, you can do that all through here as a director. Video settings, audio settings, add, remove from guest scenes, things like that, hang up, transfer, message. So any setting you want to change after the guest joins, you can configure that via this control box. And I'll add another guest. This time I'll bring myself in via Polypop. It's just a different virtual camera. The guests do not see each other yet, but at this point they can talk to each other. Okay. In the right corner, the guests can see who has joined. We did not add a configuration to the invite link that asked for a display name, but as a director, we can dynamically add one. So I can click on add a label and just say polypop. And now the guests can see that the other performers are named as well. So that's kind of fun. So while the guests are chatting, as a director, I can set up OBS, take this group scene link, and I can open up OBS. I already had it configured a bit. So this is how it would look like by default. We will say add a browser source to our default scene. We will paste in our VDO.Ninja scene link. The scene link has the room name. It also has the scene, the default scene in this case. This essentially tells us, tells the browser in OBS that it's a scene link designed to be viewed in OBS. We need to manually configure the width and height. At this point, 1920 by 1080 is a recommended resolution. If you don't have a powerful computer, you can try 1280 by 720 instead. And then, very important, we click Control Audio via OBS. Okay? And that allows us to capture the audio from this browser source into OBS. If you don't click that Control Audio via OBS, you will get echo and like feedback issues. You will hear the guests quite loud, and the echo cancellation will not kick in. So make sure you have Control Audio via OBS to prevent any audio issues. If we do everything right, though, we will see that the audio is picked up in OBS through the audio meter. And we'll also see that we have the two guests appearing. Now, because we used a group scene link here, it auto mixes the guests together by default and adds the guests into the scene. But we also have for each individual guest something called a solo link. So we can use these links instead that are specific to each individual guest. And that lets us bring them in as individual, isolated browser sources. So I can just drag this actually into OBS. Okay, I can talk again. But there we go, right? I brought the guest in as a solo link just by dragging it and then making sure I clicked on Control Audio via OBS. And it also worked. So that's another way to bring things in. You just drag and drop. If you're using Chromium or Chrome, that will work. And you again just need to make sure Control Audio via OBS. And you can bring each individual guest in if you want that way so that you have fine control, or you can just let the group scene link do everything automatically. Okay? Very basic usage here. Now, the guests still don't see each other. They can talk, and that's great, but they don't hear the director. They don't see the OBS output. So as a director, we don't hear them yet either. We need to unclick the speaker mute button to hear the guests in the room, because by default, it's important that we don't unexpectedly hear things we don't want. We might also be using the output of OBS instead. So if we're listening through OBS, we go to audio in the settings, and we see that the monitoring device is our headphones. OBS doesn't have echo cancellation, so we would need to wear headphones in this mode. And then we would also have to click on Browser Source Advanced and select Monitor and Output. And then I'd be able to hear the guests through my headphones, through OBS. Now, instead, I prefer to listen to the guests through VDO.Ninja itself. I don't have to wear headphones this way because echo cancellation is supported in this mode. Now for the guests to hear me, I have to enable my microphone and video. So I'll click this. And now the guests will see my video. The guests will see themselves in the top right corner as a little preview. And they can move that around or hide it. But they will not see each other still. Now, if I click on this little gear icon as a director, I will see that I can choose my video source. What I wanted to select, though, is not my camera. I want the guests to see the output of OBS. So I will select the OBS virtual camera. And that's what the guests will see. Now I just need to start it by clicking on Start Virtual Camera. Now the guests will see the output of OBS with low latency. And the latency from the guest to the director with OBS back to the guest is really rather low on a good connection. It's quite low. It should be anywhere between 100 to 400 milliseconds of delay, usually on a good connection. Just to give you an idea there, and the audio latency, because it's still peer-to-peer, it's going to be quite low. The guests will be able to talk to each other, usually at around 40 to 70 milliseconds of latency. So it's really great for real-time chat. So as a director, you see the little preview of the OBS output in the bottom corner, and you'll see that your little microphone icon is going green, meaning that your microphone is now on as well. You can select that here as well, and the guests will now hear you. You can mute yourself, of course, and the guests will not hear you then. Something to note is by default, the director is not picked up by OBS. So if I go to OBS, we see that our scene link does not include my video as a director. It's excluded. That is set up by default. You can change that. You can either add show director to your scene link as a parameter & show director. You can also add show director to your director page here. You can also configure that flag before you enter the room as one of those checkmark items. And that will then let your camera be seen by OBS. But because we're in broadcast mode, the assumption is we are sharing our OBS output. And we don't want OBS going back into OBS because then you get an infinite loop. It also means the audio of the director does not go in to OBS. So if you want OBS to hear you, you're going to have to add your microphone manually to OBS. And now OBS will hear you. And if you want to add your camera to OBS, you can do that as well. For example, if you add your camera to OBS directly, the guests will then see your camera via the OBS output. So that's how you would configure yourself in OBS as well, but also share the output of OBS with everyone in the room. Now, you are sharing only the audio at the moment. You're sharing only your microphone audio with the guests. They don't hear the OBS audio. They do hear themselves because VDO.Ninja is providing that audio. And this is probably the best way to go. Let the guests just hear each other. There's no echo cancellation problems, no complex audio setups. But if you do want to let the guests hear OBS as well, we can go to settings. We go to our audio settings, and we mentioned the monitoring device. We select a virtual audio cable. We'll have to download this driver. It's a free download, donationware, I think. So VB cable. We select that as our monitoring device. In OBS then, we click on Advanced Audio Properties, and we choose which audio sources we want the guests to hear. So we want them to hear my microphone through OBS, let's say. But we don't want them to hear themselves. So we keep the monitor output off for the browser source because that is the guest. If you enable this, they'll hear themselves, which will drive them crazy. Now, in VDO.Ninja, we don't want them to hear our microphone anymore because we've selected that in OBS as the output. We want them to hear the virtual audio cable. Okay, so we select the VB audio cable as our microphone source, as a director in VDO.Ninja. So the way this works again is our microphone is added to OBS. OBS is outputting that audio to the virtual audio cable, along with any other audio we want, sound effects, movie clips, things like that. And VDO.Ninja as the director is now publishing that video and audio to the guests. So now as a guest, I hear the audio of OBS minus my own audio because we did not include that as the output in OBS. We also, though, potentially could see all the performers and even the director if they're loaded into OBS this way. Okay, I hope that covers the basics here. So to recap, in this video we showcased how to create a group room. We showcased how to invite guests into the room in broadcast mode so they only see the director's output. We've shown how to bring video into OBS. We've shown how to bring video from OBS back in to VDO.Ninja and publish that to the guests. We've also shown how to either use the director room to talk to guests directly as a director via the VDO.Ninja room and not be a performer. But we've also shown how to use, how to include ourselves in OBS as a performer with our microphone, potentially our camera, and bring that back out and share that to the guests via the VDO.Ninja director page. So we're not talking to the guests directly through the director, but we're routing the OBS audio and video that concludes us to the guests via the VDO.Ninja director page. Now, when you're using broadcast mode, all the load of that room is on you as a director because you are sharing the video from OBS to all the guests in the room. If you have a 16-core or 12-core CPU processor, you probably won't have any problems at all managing small to medium room sizes. But if you have, if you only have 3 or 4 people in a room, virtually any modern computer will have no problems. Larger rooms, 20 people, you will probably need a 16-core CPU to kind of maintain the load and publish to all the guests at a high quality. Now, there are a couple options as well. You'll need to refer to my other YouTube videos on these topics, but one is adding Meshcast to the director page and reloading. And what we see is we have something called Meshcast publishing regions in the bottom. These are essentially video distribution servers. So as a director, when I enable my camera now, the video bounces off a server in this case, the US East, and then is distributed to all the guests in the room via a server. This reduces my CPU load as a director, since I only have to publish one video to the Meshcast servers, and then those servers distribute the video on my behalf. The problem with this is that the latency is going to be higher. You'll have an additional 200 milliseconds of latency potentially, roughly, that the guests then have to account for. That's probably the biggest downside. Meshcast servers sometimes during peak hours might get a little bit laggier due to just the internet being heavily used at that hour. So you might still get better performance keeping things peer-to-peer without Meshcast. But if you are having problems with the CPU, you can give Meshcast a go. Another option, if you are not using Meshcast, let's say you're, again, publishing video peer-to-peer, which offers the lowest latency, you have the option of changing the room bitrate. So right now, the guests see my output at 500 kilobits per second, but I can increase that if I want high-quality video. They now see the video at 2800 kilobits, for example, and much higher quality. But if we're having problems with the CPU load, we can lower that down to, let's say, 100 kilobits. The guests can still see all the other guests, just at a lower quality now. It's noticeably lower frame rate and lower quality, but you can have more people in a room and not overload your computer or network as much because the bitrate is lower. Okay. And we can change that setting dynamically. The default is 500. Just so you're aware, increasing that above 500 will substantially increase your CPU load as a director. On my AMD 16 core computer, I can handle 20 people in a room at medium quality settings, roughly, let's say. But if you're on a laptop or an older computer, you might find you might only be able to handle 4 guests at a time. And in that case, you can always use Meshcast as a backup system if needed. Okay, I think that covers all the basics. If you need help with documentation, check out the documentation at docs.VDO.Ninja. Lots of guides there. I have YouTube videos up as well. And if you need live support, I'm available on Discord at discord.video.ninja. Just drop a message. I'm online most of the day and available to help. Usually available for emergency support as well, 24/7. You can talk to any of the moderators if you need to get a hold of me for emergency support. Okay, I think that's it. So thank you very much for watching. Ciao.